This week, we read Torah portion about two brothers, two twin brothers. Although the family which is in our minds today, brothers are not twins, but they're still two brothers. Do you still believe in coincidence? One, however, tricks the other, lies to their father, and steals the birthright, which is an ancient equivalent of making his dad to sign the will, to give most of the inheritance only to him, and almost nothing to the other. Perhaps at this point, I have to say that not all Torah stories should be treated as an inspiration and model of behavior for all siblings. And I hope you agree with me, Michael. But let us look at this story a bit closer. Unsurprisingly, Jacob's behavior creates a deep conflict between the brothers. Esau is extremely angry with his brother over the stolen birthright, and Rebekah urges Jacob's mother, urges his son to leave his home, and go to live with her family to Laban. Eliot Rabin observes that Jacob is the first character in the Bible, in the Torah, whose experiences on the road are described to the reader. Not experience at home, but experience when you're on a journey. Well, Abraham was the first to travel, but we don't know much about his stories while traveling. And in addition, Jacob is forced to move. He is on the road, alone, in a strange place. And Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. These are the fateful words that open this week's parasha. In the ancient world, to be on the road, journeying from one location to another, is not an environment of beautiful and nice conditions, nice views, and to take picture and put it on Instagram. The road is lawless expanse between the comfort, familiarity, and safety of inhabited spaces, a place where people can be attacked, robbed, and disappear. Only when you understand this context, you can see the significance of that moment for Jacob, a turning point in his life, the place in between. At that moment, Jacob is vulnerable. He is a homeless, rough sleeper who puts a stone under his head at night because this is the only thing he has. Most people would blame Jacob and say that, well, he lied to his father, he tricked his brother, he deserves this. His own actions led to the situation where he turned his brother's anger against him and had to leave home. However, we can look at this story from a slightly different perspective. Jacob had to flee from a violent family member. He had no choice but to run away and become homeless in order to save himself. Was it an easy choice? Of course not. But the alternative was so much worse. Talking about this story, we also need to remember that Jacob was a man who in the future will get his father's inheritance and will have all the possessions. He will be okay in the future. But what if it was a woman? What if there was no savings, no inheritance, or any other systems of local support available? We know too well that women in the ancient society had almost no power and often were treated like possession. But is it true about our society? It is true about ancient society, but is it only about ancient world? This Shabbat, was chosen to be a special Shabbat, a Jewish Women's Aid Shabbat. Jewish Women's Aid is the only specialist organization in the UK supporting Jewish women and children affected by domestic abuse. The goal of this Shabbat is to focus on the UK Jewish community on the issue of domestic abuse and violence, and generate important conversations that lead to cultural change. Last year, an estimated 1.6 million women in the UK experienced domestic abuse, and over the course of their lifetime, 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse, and 1 in 5 women will experience sexual violence. There is currently no research to suggest that Jewish women are either more or less likely to experience this. Jewish Women's Aid experience suggests that Jewish women are affected by abuse in line with national average. However, the research has found that, on average, Jewish women take about 2 years longer to report it than the national average, 11.5 years instead about 9.5 years. Jewish Women's Aid supports about 700 women every year. Naomi Dixon, CEO of Jewish Women's Aid, writes, "Relationship abuse isn't just one thing. It's usually a pattern of abuse over a period of time, taking different forms and affecting people in different ways. For example, it could be physical, but it also could be emotional or financial. As a family-oriented community, it can be very different in the Jewish community to acknowledge that there are women among us who have been mentally or physically mistreated or forced to do something. And it is hard to think of harassment taking place in the corridors of our Jewish spaces. The fact is that it happens, and we need to do more to prevent and confront this behavior. Let's work together to break the taboo around abuse and make Jewish community spaces a place where abusive behavior is directly challenged and women are fully supported. And to be honest with you, in preparation to this Shabbat, the celebration of Bar Mitzvah of a young and talented Michael, I felt that it is wrong to raise such a heavy and such serious topic. But at the same time, it felt much worse to ignore it. When all communities in this country are asked to talk about it, not raising it will appear as standing idly by struggles of our sisters. Michael, from many conversations we had leading to your bar mitzvah, I know how much you reflect on fairness and justice. And I remember very well our conversations about world's poverty and what is the reason of poverty. And I know that you will speak a bit more about it tomorrow. And I know that you don't avoid asking difficult questions. In fact, you respect people who raise difficult questions and challenge old conventions. In fact, you yourself do it quite often, for better or for worse in your family. I have to say that the LJS, the Liberal Jewish Synagogue, is fortunate to have you as one of our congregants. I look forward in the future, in the very near future, in fact, to work with you together on improving our community, our society, and the world around us. Perhaps it is time for our community to follow your example and to ask uncomfortable questions and raise difficult topics. I think that sometimes what we call a teenagers, not revenge, what the word, challenge, it can be very, very useful. And we need this voice in our community. We know that it took Jacob over 20 years, and some say almost 30 years, before he was able to return home and see his brother again. We also know that on the way back home, he struggled and wrestled with angel, and some say with himself, and received a new name, Israel, which means wrestling with God. And he was able to change his behavior and overcome his destructive instincts to be manipulative, to lie. This is what makes him an inspirational figure and a great model for all of us. He started as somebody who lied, tricked and deceived, who used his power to gain possessions for himself and a blessing for himself. But he was able to change and become the true model of behavior. It is not what kind of person he was that matters. It is the kind of person he became that makes him a great ancestor. And I hope that this Shabbat will help us, all of us, to learn and recognize our mistakes and see destructive and violent forces around us, challenge others, and be brave enough to help our friends, brothers, and sisters to create a space, safe space for all. Because if not now, when? Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. And let us say, Amen.